But when you start looking at all this, the account doesn't make much sense. Okay. So here is the flag of the 23rd North Carolina from a North Carolina archives that was captured by the 88th and returned after the war. So a couple of the guys that were in the 88th that stand out that you might know of. On the right is a guy named Lieutenant Shell who was captured in the first day. And I have this, oh wait a minute, that's wrong, let me get his name. Yeah, Lieutenant, it's the Sergeant George L. Shell. I had his great-great-grandson on a tour of the battlefield.
Oh, cool.
On the left is Samuel Boone. Guess who his grandfather's brother is? Daniel Boone. He's from Berks County, Pennsylvania, and he's involved in the first day of the battle. And of course, if you look at the Pennsylvania Monument, his name is on there. So if you ever have anybody on a tour at the Pennsylvania Monument you want to impress, you can show him Samuel Boone. And again, Daniel Boone, I used to think it was a grandfather, but it's grandfather's brother. There's a monument to the spot where the 88th Pennsylvania captured the flag of the 23rd North Carolina. As a matter of fact, that monument right there
was moved.
Yeah, it was dedicated on August 27th, 1883. It is the first monument on the first day's battlefield. But originally that monument was not there. It was back along that farm lane where the current monument to the 88th is. And it wasn't moved out to that location until after the other monument to the 88th was placed. So, and believe me, I have no idea how they would know after houses were built and the farm lane was put in, and that's out in the middle of the field, that that's the exact location. So, you have to accept it with a grain of salt. But it's the oldest monument on the first day's battlefield. And I want you to walk out there after this tour to that site to see that spot. So eventually Baxter's brigade runs out of ammunition. They capture, part of Iverson's brigade. We'll never know how many, because a lot of those guys were not permanently captured. They were captured back when the Southern Army overran that position later in the day. So we'll never know exactly how many they captured when they charged out into Iverson's pits. Eventually, Ramser's brigade is brought up, and there's another assault made. By that time, Paul's brigade of Robinson's division replaces Baxter's brigade. Baxter actually takes a position on the top of the ridge, not far from the railroad cut, where they'll hang out the rest of the battle until the retreat through town, basically out of ammunition. There's lots of accounts of that unit in a different position. Gabriel Paul's brigade arrives. Paul is wounded in the fighting. Ramseur divides his brigade. Some of his brigade will assist Iverson. Some of his brigade will join with O'Neill, and all three of the units and the remnants of the men will hit Oak Ridge from two sides, and Paul's brigade is driven back across the top of that ridge with heavy losses. Adrian Root, the colonel of the 94th New York, is captured in the fighting, and his unit suffers like one of the highest losses in captured men by the Northern Army during the battle. I showed at the beginning, I forget what number it is, but it's really high. The 16th Maine, General Robinson orders the 16th Maine to stay behind as a rear guard. And he actually sends them, first I have let me go back to that first. They actually put up a marker near the Mummersburg Road intersection, and it says that this is the spot where they made their stand, and almost everyone agrees that it was not that spot that they made the stand. As a matter of fact, it's obvious when you read the accounts that the 16th Maine, Colonel Charles Tilden, is sent to make a stand in the rear guard, and basically they're ordered to sacrifice their regiment so the rest of the division can pull away. but apparently they only stand there, wait for everybody to leave, fire one volley, and then they follow the rest of the division. And here's an interesting fact. In Robinson's official report, he thanks every colonel of every regiment of his division for their courage and valor, except Colonel Tilden. He kind of censures him by not praising him and praising everyone else. I think it's very telling. The 16th Maine eventually makes it back to the railroad cut, and by that time, the whole division is collapsed, and the Confederates end up capturing a large portion of the 16th Maine. But the 16th Maine would have you believe they were captured where that monument is at the Mummasburg Road and not at the railroad cut. And this caused us some issues with Gettysburg College when they destroyed the railroad cut. Because they were arguing, what are you talking about? The 16th Maine were captured up there where their monument is. It says that. But there are a few accounts that talk about them being captured in the railroad cut. The 13th Massachusetts, I wanted to point out, only a couple more minutes. One of my favorite books on the battle was written by a guy named Austin Stearns. It wasn't printed until the 1960s, but it's 3 years with Company K, 13th Massachusetts. And the guy even has illustrations about the battle in it and has a lengthy chapter about the first day's fighting. And he's actually captured on the retreat on July 1st and ends up at the Christ Lutheran Church, which was a hospital for many of the men that were wounded or taken prisoner in that fight on July 1st. And he has this really interesting, drawings in it that I think are kind of cool. Like this one called The Effects of a Shell. He draws stick figures, but he draws stick figures where an artillery shell is going through one of the stick figures. I think it's interesting. And he's got this good friend of his that is killed on the ridge in the first day's fighting. And he actually, the death of Sergeant Wheeler, and he actually describes the death in an interesting fashion. Let's see if I can find it. He says, I turned to see what had been the effect of old Company K. The first thing I saw was Sergeant Wheeler, one of his best friends, laying on the ground but a short distance away. There being so much noise and din, I could not tell by looking at him how bad he was hurt, for I could not hear a sound. I went up to him and spoke to him, but received no answer. I saw that he was shot through the head, the bullet striking him in the left temple, and the blood and brains were oozing out. While I was looking at him, he took his left arm and put it up to his forehead and tried to wipe it, and made a low gurgling sound with his lips at the same time. There being no time to be wasted on a dead man, I left him. And then he goes on. It's kind of harsh, don't you think, for his friend? It's a really good book, though, if you get a chance. And I don't think it's been reprinted, so it's kind of hard to get, but you can find it. And it's about the fighting along the ridge. Okay. And then, Paul's brigade will retreat across the ridge. The Southern Army do capture the ridge. And like I say, one of the reasons Paul's brigade has so many men captured is because they have the farthest to go to get back to the town of safety. A lot of them get to the railroad cut and are captured in the railroad cut. And when they get to the railroad cut, the seminary position has fallen, and all the troops are retreating back through the town. And I have a few accounts of the retreat in my Lee's headquarters book, and we're getting ready to end here. But I want to read one of the accounts I discovered when I was doing research for this book, which is more about Lee's headquarters, but I put some interesting information in it about the retreat back towards town. I found this letter by Wilbur Judd of the 97th New York in the Herkimer County Journal. Oh, I better use my magnifier. The order was given to fall back to the railroad. We found that they had turned our left also, and our only escape was follow the railroad into town. Our regiment was the last to leave and the last into town. Colonel Spofford, Colonel Eggleston, and myself were at the rear of the column. And when we were out of the woods on the railroad, the rebels were 20 yards nearer the town than we were. The colonel and the captain did not think it best to run the gauntlet and turn the opposite way into the deep cut for protection. But I did not fancy the idea of being taken and went into town. And of course, the captain and the colonel, lieutenant colonel, are captured in the fighting when they go to the railroad cut. I beg leave to state that it was running the gauntlet in the strict sense of the word. The bullets were flying in from every side in a perfect shower. The air seemed so filled that it seemed almost impossible to breathe without inhaling them. Someone fell beside me at every step, but he made it. He survived, only to be killed in the Battle of the Wilderness, I believe. So, the other interesting thing is that in the 1880s and 90s, John Batchelder had reunion after reunion at Gettysburg. And he had the veterans come back and drive stakes to mark where things happened. And now, today, at the Park Library, we have a partial list of these stakes. And we don't have a whole list, but the stakes we have say things like, this is the spot where this flag was captured, or this is where General Paul was wounded, or this is where the right of this unit was positioned. And you can look at this list,